So this is going to be the last of the improvers lesson. It's going to build on it. It's just going to be lesson 3. I was asked for the menu. What happens if, because we've extracted a list down here, it's a unique list. So for example, it's only picked up chicken breast, chicken thighs and minced beef, which you would think that it would only be one. So what I've done over here, just made a little table and then used the COUNTIF function to look up this range and count if the number of times chicken breast comes up or chicken thighs and minced beef, and then that'll give you a figure there. So that's one way that you can do it, and that's quite handy. In here for the date, all I've done is I've put today's day, so equals today, open brackets, close brackets, and that will put today's date in. In this cell, I've just said today's date plus 7 days, and then that'll get you a menu for a week then. And then hopefully you find the menu quite handy. If you haven't got XLOOKUP because your version of Excel is before 2019, you can use VLOOKUP because these values here are in the left-hand column here. So you can use VLOOKUP then. So we're now going to move on to tables and just play around with them. Okay, so we're now going to look at tables. And on this first sheet, it just gives you what is a table, why use a table, and then some advantages and some disadvantages of using a table. I would urge you, where possible, try and use a table. And this was created by Gemini AI, which is quite handy. So on here, we've got a table, and I think it goes down to 1,700 rows, and there's all sorts of various different things on there. And where possible, get your data to be contiguous, where it means one after another. Try not to, say, have 2018 in here, 2019 data there, 2020 data in there. It will just make it a little bit difficult for you to extract what it is that you want to be able to do when you come to use a pivot table. So we're now going to convert this to a table. So we're just going to click in any cell, and we can either press Ctrl and T, or we can go Format as a Table up here, choose our format style, and then just select one. It now picks up the table range, so we can see it's gone all the way down to 1,717 row. My table has headers, click OK, and it's now formatted that as a table for me. When I go down the bottom to the very last row, you can see that we've got the little blue box, which means that this is in a table, and we'll be able to then add data to it without a problem, and everything will be able to update itself. So we've now put it as a table. If we wanted to, we could change the design, but I'm going to put a total row in here, add a sum column, it said there. And if I click in this cell now, I get the little drop-down box, and I can change that to average, or I can change it to count, or the maximum value, the minimum, or we're just going to keep sum there. Okay, and go all the way back to the top. Change the table style so that there's a band in the rows. Well, it's already got that from the table style that I needed. I could have been like that. I'm just going to choose that one. Okay. Remove the filter drop downs from the column labels. So I'm just going to click into where the column labels are, and then I can get rid of my filter button. It clicks off that way. Alternatively, I could go to the Home tab, click on Sort and Filter, and remove my filter buttons that way. But on Table Design, that allows me to do that. Rename the table Sales. I think I have to call it Sales 1 because I've already got sales here. Sales 1. Press Enter. Insert a slicer for categories. So if I go on my table design again, here I've got the option to put a slicer in purely based for the table, so I can do that. Categories, click OK, and you'll see it's come up in the default blue. So I need to change that back to red, back to green. Make it a little bit bigger. I can, if I wanted to, add more columns. So I've got that there. And then make it a bit smaller. So you can do it that way. So if I click, remove my filter buttons, these now, in essence, act as the filter for me. So just click on beverages and you can see it's extracted all the beverages for me there. I could hold the shift key down and get them, hold the control key down and then choose 2, or I could remove or clear all the filters and then get all 4 of them there. So there, I've now got a slicer for these categories. Insert a pivot table on a separate sheet for the sum of the categories by years. Now, you probably want to put your pivot table on a separate sheet because your pivot table may expand when you've got more data that goes into it. So to put a pivot table in, we're just going to select in any cell. We're going to go to the Insert tab and then Pivot Table. Sales, we're going to put in a new worksheet and then click OK. It now comes up with the pivot table there and it asks us to put the pivot table fields in. So I want the sales, and because the sales is values, it's already gone in there. We want the category in the rows and the months we're going to put into there. So now it's going to filter these or pivot these by the years. And if we wanted to, we could just click on the little plus button. That gives it by quarter. And then we could just do it by month if we wanted to. So it gives us far more flexibility. I'm now going to go under design and change the format so it fits managing my format. Now I'm going to change these values so that they're going to be in currency. So what I could do, right click, value field settings, and now I need to go to number format, because if I don't do number format, it'll only change it within that cell, and I want it to change it with all of it. I'm going to go to currency, 2 decimal places, click OK, and it's now changed all my figures into currency. So there we go. We can see that within this sheet, we've got the table, but then we've got a slicer for the table, and then we've also put a pivot table in. Now the slicer is connected just to the table, although the pivot table is also picking up its data from here, but the pivot table and this slicer are not connected. So let me just show you that. That's why it might be beneficial to put your pivot table on a separate sheet. So if I wanted to then click on beverages, you can see the information in the pivot table goes. Likewise condiments, it's moved up and it starts to go all over the place. So that's not great. So the slicer is different for here. If I wanted a slicer for this pivot table, I'd have to go to Pivot Table Analyze, insert a slicer, categories, and met this for the pivot table. Let's change that design. And you'll see now that this is just for the pivot table, not for this table here. Whereas this slicer affects this table, this slicer affects just the pivot table. So that's just something to be aware of. So if we now look at this practice table, it's asking you to format this data in an Excel table. Again, I'm just going to press Ctrl and T this time. Let's click OK. And now I've got my table. I'm going to change that. Keep the formatting of green. Add the date from the add the data from the add data sheet. So we've got some additional data here. So here's some additional data. If I highlight this data, press Ctrl and C, go back to my practice table. If I click here and then press Ctrl and V, you'll see it's now added it into my table, and my table has expanded to include this additional data. And that's one of the benefits of doing that. add an average for the salary column. Well, we know that if we click on table design, total row, if I click into here, and then I can change that to the average, I've now got the average salary of 43,814. Change the table style so that there is no self-fill or borders. Okay, so let's just have a look there. Let's go back to the table, to the style. And we probably want the one that's up there. There we go. So that's got no, change the table style so there's no self-fill or borders. Okay. Remove the filter drop downs. So just remember, just click into there. We can just change the filter, remove the filter button that way. Rename the table employees. There we go. And oh, the name already exists. Employees 1. Employees 1. Insert a slicer for gender. So right, insert a slicer. Do for gender. Click OK. And now we've got the slicer there for gender. So if we were just to click on any one of them, males, we can see we've got all the male employees, females, and immediately it tells us that the males, their average wage is 44,000, whereas the females, 43,000. So a bit of a gender gap there. Okay. And now insert a pivot table on salary and gender on a separate sheet, group the ages, not mine in this for training purposes. So I'm just going to click into any cell, insert, pivot table. We're going to make it a new worksheet. We're going to go to salary, the age, and then it's the gender in the rows. Oh, there we go. And you can see that that's not very user friendly because we've got all the ages there. And what we need to do is we're going to group these ages so that it becomes a lot more user friendly. Let's just change the design. Green, keep in there. So I'm just going to right click. I'm just going to select the cell there. I'm going to right click and it comes up now group. And here we go. I can group these starting at 19, ending at 59, and I'm going to group by a 10-year age gap. Click OK. And you can see it's grouped them into a far more user-friendly way for me. Okay. What I've done here, imagine that you've got your table and you didn't want to do a pivot table, but you wanted to find out what the totals were for each of these categories. So if I just click on beverages, we really don't know. We've got to go all the way down to the bottom. And then I'd have to put the totals row in, and then it would tell me what the total is for the beverages there. But it's a bit of a pain, that is. So let's see how we can do that differently. What I've moved is I've moved my slicer up to its the top. I've added a couple more rows in. So all I just did is selected a row, right click, inserted. Enough to get my slicer in there. I made category total, and then I'm going to put in here, I'm going to type in aggregate equals aggregate, and it's going to aggregate the totals for me from this column. So I get different functions here. I'm going to use number 9, which is sum, comma, and then it asks me which one I want, and this one is number 1. So I want to ignore hidden rows, nested subtotals, and aggregate functions. So number 1, comma. It's now asking me for my array, and because we're using a table, I just need to select it there, and it comes up sales table. Press close brackets, and now it comes up with the value. Now the beauty is if I now select beverages, it comes up with the value there. It'll come up with, if I select 2, or 3, Give me my different values there. So, and that's quite a handy function to have. So that's using the aggregate function, which will then allow you to get the value for each one of these quite easily. So hopefully you found that useful. Right, the remaining sheets, just for you to practice on, you can do a range of different stuff, turn it into a table, create some pivot tables, put slices, put some charts in, play around, modify it how you want. Same again with this one. This one, just a case really of playing around. I think what might be interesting though is customers. What we've got is we've got these as the addresses in one cell, which we might not want to do. What we might want to put is put the street in one column, the town in another, and then the postcode in another. And to do that, let's just extract the first one, which is 106 Main Street. And then we're going to go up to this function here. We're going to use flash fill. Flash fill. And now flash fill has extracted from all of these the streets that I wanted. Likewise, next one is Liverpool. Again, flash fill. And it's extracted the cities and the postcode. Again, flash fill. And then it's extracted them for me there, which is quite handy. So that's using flash fill. So that's something that you might want to have a look at. Look, I hope it's been worthwhile. There's lots of things I haven't got right. Hopefully I've not confused you too much. I've managed to confuse myself a few times. Hope you've enjoyed the Improvers course. Just keep on learning Excel. The thing is about Excel, the more you think you know, the more you realise you don't know. So just keep on playing, practicing, and enjoy it.